Thank you, Mary, Ekaterina, Donia. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm really happy and honored to be part of this meeting of national representative of the Council on Cardiovascular Nursing. I think there are a number of national societies representative meetings throughout the ESC, and I'm really happy that the Council on Cardiovascular Nursing is now part of this initiative. It's very important to have you on board, and in particular in this message of the application and the dissemination of ESC guidelines. ESC guidelines are an important part of the work of the ESC, but it is only a part of all the education process, which the definition of learning objective, design and deployment of educational material, and also evaluation, which is key. And we should pay a tribute to Professor Martin Simons, who is the president of the ESC, and who more than 15 years ago really initiated this process that he called the Well of Wisdom, that is linking different work of the ESC, registries, guidelines, textbook and publication, educational activities, and who developed these different activities trying to work together, and in particular initiated ESC registries. At that time, this was the EuroHeart survey, and it has proven to be successful. Now, we call this the virtuous circle. It is the same problem, the same principle, but it's our aim is to have it better organized around the different resources we had in the European Society of Cardiology. Of course, one of the duties in medical careers is to do research. This will lead to guidelines, also to textbook, with a new word of Cardiomed for the ESC textbook. These guidelines and the knowledge from textbook should be disseminated using education tools, and EORP registries are here to assess the implementation of these guidelines, of this knowledge, because writing guidelines is important, but which is even more important is to be sure that they are applied, and if they are not applied, why, and trying to improve our patient care, because this is the ultimate goal, of course, we are all sharing. I will now address this different part briefly and trying to highlight the interaction between these different structures. What about the new guidelines? The ESC guidelines have been a real successful story, and they are now worldwide accepted. In 2017, there have been some changes in the presentation of guidelines, in particular more highlight on gaps in evidence, because we don't have guidelines for every situation, and some of them are still rely on low level of evidence. The key points, which are the most important parts, the 10 commandments from guidelines, which should be used and highlighted in learning objective as well as in registries for the evaluation of actual practices. Another important initiative was to shorten the text and to focus on recommendations for clinical practice. And that is now guidelines are really focusing on practical issues, and the background, the rationale is now included in the ESC textbook, or now called Cardiomed, which with a link between guidelines and this textbook. We hope that with this splitting of all the knowledge, we will now have guidelines oriented more directly on clinical practice. The ESC textbook, or Cardiomed, will be available next year. It is highly consistent with guidelines, of course, because it is written by the same group. The task force of guidelines is also in charge of writing the corresponding chapter of the textbook. And this has been already done for the valvular heart disease guideline and chapter, which are already both online, and the process will be expanded over the next year to other topics, syncope and pregnancy in 2018, and progressively to all guidelines which will be released every year. Our aim is to have to improve the visibility of this interaction between guidelines and textbook, and as with regards to the 2017 guidelines on valvular heart disease, that was a pilot, we will have a clear mention on the link between the guidelines and the textbook. To be frank, it was not so clear in the very first version on the online text of guidelines, but now it will be, and this link will allow for the readers to go straight forward to the corresponding chapter of the textbook. This is free of charge, and it will be possible for those who wish to have more complete explanation on the rationale on epidemiology, pathophysiology, which are important but not directly in connection with practice, and so to have the document of guidelines itself, which is shorter, more user-friendly, and focusing on practice. So besides this effort to rational the way to translate the knowledge, we have education tools to disseminate these guidelines and textbook. So what can we do in the ESC in this setting too? We have many resources, and over the last years the educational committee developed a number of initiatives which are directly linked to guidelines. The guidelines into practice tracks, which is a summary of all presentation at each ESC Congress, which are linked to a given guidelines, and so it's possible using these guidelines into practice track to easily access this presentation coming from ESC 365. Clinical Case Gallery is an interactive gallery of clinical cases which is based on a stepwise approach with iconography, video loops, and with sequential multiple choice question, which allow for the reader to go through a practical illustrative clinical case and to check their knowledge and to have the comments of the on the questions which are raised, and all these cases are, this is a request, should be linked to the corresponding guidelines. And I'm happy that the Council on Cardiovascular Nursing has been involved at the very beginning in this clinical case gallery, which is used by your council. Clinical webinars are very popular, are more and more popular, and these consist in 1 hour sessions based on broadcast presentation of cases, which are once again directly related to guidelines. The program, the annual program of webinar is in close connection with the guidelines which have been released the year before, and this is another way to disseminate knowledge. They can be downloaded and seen afterwards, so even if you don't assist to the live session, you can see it afterwards, either alone or share it with colleagues, and this is a complementary way to disseminate the knowledge around guidelines. The European examination of clinical cardiology is more directly dedicated to evaluation, and it concerns a greater number of countries now. And the general cardiology program is now included in the last version of the SCAL platform. So all these interactive tools built all around the Excel platform are here for having a better access, more user-friendly access to the knowledge developed by the ESC, and also to evaluation. The priority is to focus on key points on the guidelines, once again, that is not getting into small details, but really highlighting what is the core of each guidelines, the need for filling the gaps in knowledge. And now, besides these so I must say institutional tool. We have new initiatives which are even more user-friendly, in particular around mobile apps. Of course, it is very popular, and it's a good way to disseminate guidelines. As a pilot, Catch Me around the guidelines of atrial fibrillation are already highly popular, and there are two applications, one dedicated to patients and one to medical healthcare professionals, which are additional ways to disseminate these guidelines. Finally, we now come to EORP registries, and the EORP registries already exist for more than 7 years, but as for guidelines and education tools, there has been a change over the last years to use these guidelines to be more directly dedicated to the evaluation, to the application of ESC guidelines. And new registries, which began last year, are characterized by a move from continuous registries in which patients were continuously included to snapshot registries, that is, during a limited time of data collection, usually 3 or 4 months, with a limited follow-up, maximum of 1 year, that is to have a really contemporary evaluation of practices. The aim of having a short time of data collection is also to optimize the resources of the participants, because of course for an investigator it's easier to collect data during 3 or 4 months than in a continuous registries. These registries are planned to be set approximately 2 years after the release of ESC guidelines, and the main goal is to evaluate the quality of the implementation of guidelines, in particular the most important aspects which are summarized in key points and which have been disseminated using the different education tools that we have seen just before. And also, this is a secondary objective, to provide outcome measurements. Are really patient well treated, but also do they have a benefit in terms of health of this implementation of guidelines? And this evaluation, of course, should be used for the preparation of the next guidelines, and in particular highlighting the issues in which there is unsatisfactory implementation of guidelines. Perhaps this is because they are not followed, because these guidelines rely on low level of evidence, and perhaps they should be formulated differently. And of course, future educational material will be built according to the finding of these registries. The objective of these European registries are, of course, to be representative of Europe. That is, all ESC participating countries are invited to participate, and we try our best to attract the maximum number of countries to have a uniform representativeness of Europe. That is to evaluate and understand the medical practices in different subspecialties. It is and it should be initiated and conducted with close collaboration with ESC constituent bodies, either subspecialty association and also national society, which are key in the conduction of registries, because of course it is absolutely necessary to have strong relays in different countries to conduct these guidelines. They are managed centrally at the European Heart House, here by the EORP team, which has really high quality resources to conduct and to analyze afterwards these registries. We cooperate with industry. Of course, you can easily understand that these activities have a cost, and there is an industry funding, but the whole activity is conducted totally independently from industries at the different step, either elaboration of the protocol, CRF, and data analysis, of course. Representativeness is key. As previously mentioned, we should really incorporate all European region. We should also try to avoid important discrepancies between country size and the number of patients included. And even within each country, it is important to have a good representativeness, that is to include a wide range of healthcare structures, not only tertiary excellence center, because they do not represent the real life, private and public hospital, university, tertiary, but also smaller referral hospital. And we also try to have a geographical distribution in a given country. That is the reason why the number of centers and of clusters, because these centers of different types are organized into clusters, are determined by the EORP, trying to ensure the best representativeness quantitatively and qualitatively. Data collection and analysis are also optimized thanks to the resources of the EORP. The CRF is elaborated by the executive committee of each registries, but benefit from the technical skills that we have here in the European Heart House. We insist on the fact that they should focus on the objective of assessing practices. They should not be too long, because if you have too long CRF, you won't end with good data quality. Different resources of the electronic CRF can be used with conditional jumps and quality control, allowing for a better quality of data at the end of the collection. The statistical analysis plan is elaborated simultaneously to data collection and should be standardized according to the different registries to have clear goals and a clear definition on the way to assess this concordance between guidelines and practice. Just to show you an example with the pilot registries on valvular heart disease, which was launched this year in 2017. This was quite successful because during the year, during a 3 months period of data collection for each center, of course, all centers did not begin at the same time. We achieved more than 7,000 patients, which were included from 28 European countries, and we hope that we will get a number of relevant information from this survey. This is a summary of the future snapshot registries, which are directly linked to ESC guidelines for those who are involved, but there are also registries dedicated not to a specific issue from guidelines, but to current issues of interest. For example, the durability of transcatheter aortic valve implantation, or specific issues in cardiac imaging, or rare disease such as coronary artery dissection. This is the graphic representation, which is easier to understand between these different registries, those who are directly linked to ESC guidelines, those on common disease, but also certain continuous registries on rare disease. So we now have a real interaction between the different resources of the ESC to achieve this virtuous circle. And as an example, the valvular heart disease guidelines update were completed in August 2017. We have, beside registry, behavioral study, in particular a study on awareness on mitral regurgitation, which was conducted last year under the auspices of the ESC, and the new guidelines which have just been released in August following behavioral studies and the registry. Congress are an important part of the ESC and are more and more successful, in particular regarding the annual ESC meetings. And of course, Congress are key to disseminate guidelines and different educational products. There are no specific sessions during the annual ESC meeting which are based on education tools, on guidelines, and also around EORP registries to highlight the respective duties which are achieved in these different activities of the ESC, and once again to highlight their interaction, which is summarized here. That is the different part we have seen. Guideline textbooks, the base of the knowledge, the education to disseminate them, the registries to evaluate them, and the Congress to disseminate all that we have learned around these different activities. This interaction process between the different structures is now organized around this GESEP, Guidelines Education Congress EORP Publications, which is a centralized organization which aims to improving the interaction between the different structures. So to conclude, we now have, I hope, optimal possibilities to integrate scientific, clinical, and medical education initiative. We already have appropriate structures and people in the ESC, but now we should continue to work to have a better integration between these different committees. The ESC scientific and educational offer should be evidence-based, and we should try our best to improve the underlying level of evidence, because this will enhance the credibility of guidelines and hopefully of their application. And really we think that taking the best of this existing structure of the ESC is a unique opportunity to move to a modern education concept, a really interactive one, achieving to improve patient care. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Bernard, for bringing us through a very concise and informative walk through the EORP registries and their links with the guidelines. Can I just ask, is there anybody who would like a question from the audience? I suppose, can I just say, it's good that the guidelines have been shortened, because I think certainly in our survey that we did recently, and just from reading the long versions, they are very long. So I think that will be, as you say, make them more user-friendly.
I'm happy with your comment.
No, but honestly, and I suppose with all the references and that as well. And as you said, the key points are so important. They're the things that people can take home with them. Any comments, or anybody like to say anything? All quiet so far.
I hope that in the near future we will have more information on the concrete results that we will have through, in particular, registries. But, well, yes, it's a little bit earlier, but hopefully we will have
but it just shows you what a lot of work goes into these registries and the committees, and how many people. It's such an involvement, really.
Yes,
so,
it's an important work, and it's particular. It's an important work of all the investigators throughout the different countries. There is no support, in particular financial support, yes, for this task, because it would not be possible to support more than 200 investigators throughout Europe. Yes. And we really should pay a tribute to all the people who are involved in this task. That's also the reason why we try our best to facilitate the work. But we think that here, in the ESC, everybody has to be involved in this task, because we have a unique organization, yes, with which we aim to achieve these goals.
And it's all voluntary.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Katrina.
Thank you very much for that very interesting and informative talk. And I'd just like to say that we can now be very proud that CCNAP is actively involved in guideline task forces. And so nurses are contributing to the development of guidelines. And of course, what this meeting is all about is getting nurses also to really play their role in guideline implementation.
I fully agree, and I think you have a lot of potential involvement in the future. Also, the place of research nurse in registries, in patient inclusion, in monitoring. I think you really have a key role to play, and that's the reason why I'm once again, I'm really happy that you are more closely involved and that all the national representatives are here. I think we will have a lot of work to do together.
Okay, thank you very much, Bernard.
Thank you.
Thank you.